Hello students, today in our video we're going to look at solving equations. I'm going to do a quick review of solving one-step equations, and then we're going to look at solving two-step equations, and then we're going to look at solving multi-step equations where the distributive property is used. Okay, so the first part of this is one-step equations, and I'll just abbreviate one-step equations. So for instance, if I have 3x equals negative 21, what operation is going on between the 3 and the x? Yes, multiplication. So I do the opposite of that. Remember, when we're solving equations, we're always looking to do the opposite to get to our solution. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And the 3's cancel out because 3 divided by 3 is 1. And so I have x equals negative 7 because negative 21 divided by 3 is negative 7. Now what if I had y over 5 equals 15? Well, what's going on between the y and the 5? Yes, that's division, because that fraction bar also means division. And so the opposite of that is multiplication. So I need to multiply by something on both sides. Well, what do I multiply by? You're right, the 5, because I'm trying to get 5 by itself. It's called isolating the variable. I'm trying to isolate the variable. So I've got to get the y by itself, which means I have to get rid of that 5 somehow. And if I multiply both sides by 5, this actually is multiplying by 5 over 1. Those 5's cancel out during the multiplication process. So I'm left with y equals 75, because 15 times 5 is 75. Now I'm pretty positive that you can solve one-step equations with addition and subtraction, so now we're going to move on to solving two-step equations. So please draw a large squiggly line to separate, and then now we've got two-step equations. Okay? A two-step equation would look something like this. 3x minus 7 equals 14. Okay? So, I've got 3x minus 7 equals 14. The variable is the last thing I'm going to deal with. So I always start with the number that does not have a variable on the same side as the variable. That's a lot of words to say. I'm going to get rid of this negative 7 first. Well, this is minus 7, and remember what I said, we always do the opposite. So what do? I add 7 to both sides, so I can get rid of the 7. And so the 3x, I'm not doing anything to the 3x, so I just bring it down. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0. I'm not going to write the 0, I just know that there's no more 0 or negative 7 on that side. Equals 14 plus 7 is 21. Okay? Again, I add it to both sides because the rule in math is whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do exactly the same thing to the other side. So I added 7 to both sides. It didn't change anything, it just moved stuff. But I'm still balanced. I still did the same thing to both sides. So now I've got 3x equals 21. We've already seen that. I divide by 3, divide by 3, so x equals 7. Well, what if I have this question? Negative 7 equals c over negative 6 plus 12. Okay? Negative 7 equals c over negative 6 plus 12. Well, again, there's the tricky part because they put the variable on the right-hand side instead of the left-hand side. Not a big deal. I'm still going to start on the side where the variable is, but I'm going to start with a number that doesn't have a variable. So that's positive 12. So I've got plus 12 on the right-hand side. Well, I need to do something to get rid of it. And what's the opposite of plus 12? Right, minus 12. So I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. So I'm going to subtract 12, and I subtract 12. And notice where I wrote the minus 12, okay, on both sides of the equation. So negative 7 minus 12 is negative 19. Equals c over negative 6, because I haven't done anything with that yet. And I know that positive 12 and negative 12 equals 0, so I'm not even going to write that down. If we write the 0, just waste space and ink and pencil and stuff. Speaking of which, I should tell you about that story. Oh, well, I'll get there in a minute. Okay, so I've got negative 19 equals c over negative 6. So now, what do I do to both sides to get c by itself? Right, multiply by negative 6. Whoops. Put the times sign in the wrong spot. Negative 6 times negative 19. So on this side, the negative 6's cancel out, and I'm left with C. And then negative 19 times negative 6, man, I got to do that in my head. 114. I think that's right. And it's positive because negative times negative. 654. Yeah, I think that's right. Could be wrong, but I think it's right. So C in this case is 114. How do I check that to make sure? Plug it back into the original equation. 114 divided by negative 6 is 119. Okay, so negative 19 plus 12 is negative 7. So yes, it does work out correctly. This last example of solving two-step equations is going to be written just a little bit different. Let's say that 12 minus 4w equals 18. Okay, 12 minus 4w equals 18. So again, I'm going to start on the side where the variable is, but I'm not going to start with the variable. I'm going to start with the number that doesn't have a variable, and that's 12. Well, what kind of 12 is it? It's positive 12. So I've got to get rid of this, so what's the opposite of positive 12? You're right, that's negative 12, and negative and minus are the same thing, so I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. Now, because if you look at that minus sign, the minus sign is attached to the 4w, not the 12. Okay? This minus doesn't have anything to do with this 12. So a lot of people would say, well, I'm going to add 12 to both sides. Well, if you added 12 to both sides, you get 24. That doesn't help me. That just puts me in a different place. I need to get rid of the 12. And so right now 12 is positive, so I've got to subtract 12 from both sides. Okay? So 12 minus 12 is nothing, so I just cross it out. I've got negative 4w equals 18 minus 12 is 6. So I've got negative 4w equals 6. In this case, what do? I divide by negative 4. Okay? The negative 4's cancel out, and I'm just left with w. And 6 divided by negative 4 is an improper fraction. This year, it's okay to leave it as an improper fraction in simplest form. I don't have to use my calculator to divide. I can just leave it as an improper fraction in simplest form. 6 divided by negative 4 would simplify to negative 3 over 2. Notice where I moved the negative sign. Anytime you have a fraction, it'll be easier on you if you put the fraction beside the fraction bar. That way, it doesn't matter which of those numbers is negative. The 3 could be negative or the 2 could be negative. But if you put the the negative sign beside it, it makes it easier to deal with later on in your math career. So now we're going to look at solving multi-step equations where distributive property is concerned. So draw a big squiggly underneath the notes that you just finished. That way it's just a line of separation. And this is multi-step equations. Okay? Multi-step equations. Well, let's give an equation that has the distributive property in it. So let's say 3 times the quantity of x plus 2 equals 9. Okay? Now you remember from the last time we talked, we have to do the distributive property first before we do anything else. All right? So I'm going to distribute the 3 to everything inside the parentheses. 3 times x is 3x, and 3 times positive 2 is positive 6 equals 9. We all remember all that? I thought you would. Okay? And so now I'm going to go back to what I just did with two-step equations. We subtract 6 from both sides, and I get 3x equals 3, because those cancel out. Divide by 3 on both sides, and x equals 1. Make sense? Let's do another one real quick. What if I have 14 minus the quantity of x plus 4 equals 12? Okay? I still have a little bit of the distributive property because I have a minus here in front of the parentheses, which actually means, remember, we got negative 1 there. Because remind me, I'll tell you that story. 14 minus 1 times the quantity of x plus 4. That would be 14, and then I'm going to distribute. Negative 1 times x is negative x. Negative 1 times 4 is negative 4 equals 12. In this multi-step, we have to combine like terms before we can continue. So I'm going to combine the 14 minus 4, which is 10, minus x equals 12. Now we're back to a one-step equation, but this 10 is kind of tricky because it comes first. Does this minus sign have to do anything with the 10? No, not at all. The 10 is positive. So the opposite of that is to subtract 10 from both sides. The 10s cancel out. I'm left with negative x. Remember, don't forget the negative. It's in front of the x, so it now becomes a negative sign. Equals 2. If negative x equals 2, then I divide both sides by negative 1 because x, or the variable, always has to be positive. So then that means the negatives cancel out and x equals negative 2. Now if you want to plug that in and figure out if that's true, negative 2 plus 4 is positive 2, and 14 minus 2 equals 12, so it does work out. I absolutely love solving equations of all kinds, and that's what we're going to be doing for the entire year and for the rest of your math career in junior high, high school, and college. You're going to be solving equations. We've got to get it down step by step and do it methodically so that we can do it correctly every time. That's all for this video. See you soon.